Let's go back to the state capture inquiry where ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa will be appearing for the second day. My colleague eNCA anchor Tumelo Mothotoane and senior reporter Siphamandla Goge joins us now. What can we expect today? Have you managed to glean any more details, Tumelo?
Absolutely. Details coming in just in terms of that expectation. It's almost an hour and 30 minutes or so to go until the president is expected to come through here. What I can tell you is that when we drove in, Jane, there was definitely a heavy police presence, just ensuring that traffic is managed. It will not interfere with the president and his entourage as they make their way right here in Braamfontein to address Zondo on that second day of his testimony. But I'm not alone. I'm still joined by my colleague, eNCA senior reporter Siphamandla Goge, but also let's welcome Mmusi Maimane joining us today to give us some reflections on what he thought from yesterday's testimony. Mr. Maimane, thank you so much for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, and it's great to be here.
I mean, the words that come to mind from yesterday are reborn, renewal, intentions to correct some of the system failures. What do you make of day one from President Ramaphosa?
Well, I think like all South Africans, all of us are deeply disappointed as citizens. Firstly, the president failed to acknowledge that much of what took place was literally of the ANC's doing, and that in fact the rot of corruption has really cancerously captured institutions of government. I thought secondly, in very pointed moments, when you reflect on places like Transnet, PRASA, the president couldn't really account for that in a world where in fact all of these institutions are facing serious.
And we touched on that. I have to jump in there and just ask Pamandla, because that's what you mentioned before, that we should expect that. It's nothing new. The president will be quite diplomatic.
Indeed, he's going to be diplomatic. He's not going to throw his comrades and his cadres under the bus. But before I proceed, let me tell you that this man is the one who started this whole Bosasa thing in Parliament. Perhaps we should ask him how he feels about the response that the president gave when he was responding to the question about why the ANC continued to receive funding and donations from Bosasa. Were you happy with that response that the president gave?
No, still to this day, we are nowhere near closer. And I remember that day specifically because we wanted to understand that at one level we can talk about the Guptas, but on another level, Bosasa were at the center of funding and capturing the ANC. And so I still maintain that accountability is being sought and we're not getting it. The citizens are shortchanged. So I'm hoping that Judge Zondo will highlight this point in the report and that action will be taken not only against individuals, but collectively at the ANC itself.
Still on that note, I mean, Mr. Maimane, the president seemed to have said when asked about party funding, specifically with Bosasa, some of the funds redirected to his own CR17 campaign. He said, listen, the ANC would not knowingly receive money from tainted hands. And he said that with this Political Party Funding Act, it will be quite revolutionary because it would change some of the exchange of funding, I suppose, between parties and some of the corrupt, alleged and accused businesses.
Well, I honestly do not give credence to that. First of all, there's been testimony here at Zondo that ANC ministers knew they received funding and from whom. So I think we must be cautious not to accept at face value that the ANC did not know. It knew. But the second challenge about capture is that it allocates particular businesses with particular contracts of the state so that the transaction can be complete. So the other questions I have been tracking is when Arthur Fraser was elected to Parliament, why was Arthur Fraser then moved to the Director General of Correctional Services, happening under President Ramaphosa? So these questions, when he knew very well that Bosasa was a funding agent, you can't not expect that there are key deployments that then take place for people to adjudicate contracts for companies so that the organization can benefit.
Colleague, I see you nodding there.
Yes, I think yesterday, if we were to contextualize it, the way ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa framed his testimony here, it was more, I will keep on going back to this point, it was more of like saying, we acknowledge it happened. It shouldn't have happened. Let's move on. There was no accountability and no transparency in saying, as we move on, how are we going to fix this? Let me give you an example. He spoke about the step-aside issue of the ANC, saying it's one of the mechanisms to deal with corruption within the ANC. But the issue of step-aside has been there for a very long time. That resolution was first pounded in 2015 during the National General Council of the ANC.
Right.
There was the 2017 elective conference where that resolution was affirmed. Nothing has happened. No one has stepped aside. Very few people, if I'm not mistaken, I can count them. There are not even 7 that have stepped aside. But the ANC has not done enough to deal with corruption within its ranks. But he came here and tried to say, well, I will take a posture which says mistakes were made, we acknowledge that, let's move on. Perhaps the question to Mr. Maimane is, what would they like to see happening in terms of that accountability? If you were to give us something concrete, what would you like to see happening?
Well, firstly, I think that we should have had criminal prosecutions take place parallel to the process, so that those who were responsible of even complicitly supporting corruption can be arrested. I think to suggest that the ANC can self-correct is a mistake, because comrades will look after comrades. Let's be honest and say, let's capacitate our state institutions. Let's take money that was designed even for this commission, deploy it to the SIU, ensure that, in fact, criminal prosecutions occur, people are arrested. But further on from that, I really think as South Africans, if we talk about this question of direct elections, because all of us are sitting here today, we've got political principals who go to office. They are not accountable to the people. They are not scared of the people. This is people who stole money from water projects, from trains, from airlines. This is services for the people. They must be directly elected so they're held accountable. So we deal with the political reform question. It's not just party funding. It's political reform. Otherwise, another party will come, repeat the same exercise, and never be accountable to citizens.
Mr. Maimane, I mean, on one hand, one would say that's the work of the police, that's the work of the Hawks to continue with those investigations, ensuring that those who are found guilty do end up being held accountable. For the Commission's purposes, it is a fact-finding commission. It is here to accumulate all the facts and advise where needs to be advised as to how state capture came to be in the country. There was criticism that I saw even online saying that Zondo was handling the president with soft gloves. There seemed to be chemistry. There wasn't necessarily a push for him to give more specifics. Even with the evidence leader, they're saying that he needs to be more direct, pushing for those details, those names and those timelines. What do you make of how the commission handled day one of the...
No, typically that. The president is not here just only in his capacity as the president of the republic, but in his capacity as the second in charge of the ANC when all of this was happening, and now the principal leader of the syndicate that captured the state. I think we must give him the same status we would Mr. Molefe, the same status we would anybody else. So I would urge that there must be some pointed questions. The president benefits from vague questions. I think he would benefit from direct questions that would come. That specifically, we need events, who in his view should be criminally liable for these issues, and that ultimately he himself, what deliberate steps is he going to take? Not this broad reform discussion that he's having, but the intentional actions to say, as we live here, what is the business of the people? Because if he is treated with kid gloves, his comrades are treated with kid gloves, why should anyone who steals to my neighbor, to the community, be treated any differently?
Yeah, and just briefly, Craig, as we wrap it up, you can add your points there, but also it goes back to what we were discussing yesterday to say it was definitely a calculated and well-prepared testimony yesterday.
Indeed, but before we wrap this up, I want to pick up on the point about Cadre deployment policy of the ANC and that deployment committee, because ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa's testimony yesterday centered around that. You know, it was like a crash course on Cadre deployment policy of the ANC and the deployment committee, which he chaired, by the way.
Right.
Remember, at the center of state capture are the allegations that cadres of the ANC were deployed to key state institutions that were captured in the end. He even said the DA, Mr. Maimane, the party that you led, has a cadre deployment policy, but it doesn't term it that. He gave the commission some examples there saying, well, all political parties in South Africa and across the world, by the way, they do have cadre deployment policy. It's not something new. Perhaps the question is on the nature of the candidates that are deployed. They're saying it needs to be people who are fit for purpose. What do you make of it?
No, look, I think it's misleading South Africans when you say that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, Cadre, when you appoint people, let's use the 48-hour debacle with the Minister of Finance. He arrived with his team.
Right.
Now, the point is, in your private office, there's room for you to appoint people. But in state-owned enterprises, no political party has the right to do that. And worse about the ANC's cadre deployment policy, by the way, is that it suffers to factionalism. So in the 48-hour thing, a new faction comes in, a new cadre comes in. So what I'm arguing for is that the president mustn't simply sit here and say political parties appoint board members here and there.
Right.
It is not true, and it ought not to be true, and South Africa can benefit from it never happening again.
We have to leave it there, but thank you so much. One says Mmusi Maimane for joining us, and we continue with that conversation. Jane, right here in Braamfontein, it is day 2. The president, in his capacity as the ANC leader, will be giving his second day of testimony. We look forward to what he has to say today, hopefully more specifics, but also in the next hour, Mcebisi Ntatjana will be joining me, further analyzing what is expected and also what were some of the loopholes from yesterday's testimony.